Hello everyone and welcome to ASP.NET Core How To. My name is Steve Bishop, and in today's video we're going to take a look at how to update from RC1 to RC2. So many of us have been developing in release candidate 1 and fully knowing that this is just a preview of the full release. However, the RC1 gave us a pretty robust framework to build our applications in. When RC2 got released, we discovered that there were so many different changes, and they were breaking changes, that our RC1 applications were not simple to upgrade from the RC1 to RC2. So many of us have been out there kind of scrambling around for how do we make some of these changes, and there are quite a few wonderful guides that you can find out online. And so I'm going to list a few of them here, and I'm sure you could probably do a search and find many others. But here are just some of the main ones that I like to reference. Now finally, I want to mention the Github Issues link that you see here at the bottom. These are all of the issues that arose, and they're basically the breaking changes between the two versions. So this should give you a pretty good place to go in order to see if something is broken, where is it broken at, and how do I fix it. Now the plan for this video is I'm going to create just a basic RC1 application. Then we're going to upgrade to RC2, and I'm going to show you all of the errors and pitfalls that I have to overcome in order to get RC1 to RC2. A lot of these upgrade guides kind of try to lay out every single thing along the way, basically assuming that everything works perfectly. And it doesn't always go that way. Sometimes you find little hiccups and errors. And I'm going to try to give you some strategies and tools along the way that are going to show you exactly how to overcome specific errors during this upgrade process. So without further delay, let's go ahead and hop into our Visual Studio window and let's create an RC1 project. So let's first start off by creating our project in RC1. So I have not upgraded anything here in my Visual Studio. I'm going to go ahead and hit New Project. I'm going to select ASP.NET Web Application, and I'm just going to go ahead and call this Core RC1 to RC2. And I'm going to go ahead and click OK. So I'm going to select a complete web application, and I'm going to set the authentication to individual user accounts. So this is going to be a fairly typical setup that we might encounter when we want to create a web application. Primarily, I want to do this because I want to get all of the basics of what Microsoft automatically puts in with ASP.NET RC1 templates. I want to try to get as much of the default information into this video and updated as possible. So let's go ahead and click OK. So after our project has been created and all of our dependencies from NuGet have been downloaded and installed, let's go ahead and run our application. So to make sure that we have all of our components ready in our application, I'm going to go ahead and go through the register section here so that we end up creating an account on a database. Now when I click on register, I expect that we will probably have to process a migration. So we'll get a little error here. And of course it says a database operation has failed while processing the request. So we need to apply a migration, and we can just go ahead and click on the Apply Migrations button here, or you can also explicitly call it here using the DNX tool. I'm just going to go ahead and click on Apply Migrations, and that will go ahead and create our migrations in our database. Once the migration is applied, we should see Migrations Applied where the button was before, and if we simply reload the page, we should be able to be logged in. Up here in the upper right-hand corner, you can see my email suggests that I have been logged in, and I can easily log off. Just to verify that the account is proper and in good order, I'm going to go ahead and click on Login. We'll try that to log in. I'll go ahead and save my password for now. Let's try some of the links. We've got About, we've got Contact. Obviously, there's nothing really in any of these because this is just a basic application that is built right out of the box with ASP.NET Core RC1. Now, there are a couple of places you can go in order to download RC2. You can go to your web browser and just simply type in dot.net, and that will take you to the .net website where you can just simply go to download.net Core here in the middle for cross-platform applications, and you'll see that you can select from Windows, Linux, OS X, or Docker. There's also some other downloads you can choose. And right here you can see I have Windows selected for right now, and I could select the NuGet Manager extension for Visual Studio. Alternatively, since I already have Visual Studio installed on my system, I could just simply go to Tools, Extensions and Updates, Updates, Visual Studio Gallery, and there we can see the same installation package. So I'm just going to go ahead and click on Update here for Microsoft ASP.NET and Web Tools, which provides Preview 1 tooling for Microsoft.NET Core 1.00 RC2. Just go ahead and proceed through the prompts here. So I'm going to go ahead and click I agree, and we'll go ahead and click yes for the user account control. Now, in order for the installation to complete, I do need to close out of Visual Studio. So let's go ahead and close out of Visual Studio here. And once it is done, we can go ahead and click OK. And I'll go ahead and come back once this is done processing and installing. Okay, so we can see that we successfully completed the installation. I'm going to go ahead and click on Close. And now let's go ahead and reopen Visual Studio, and we'll reopen our project. So we've done all the groundwork here to get started with this video. We created a sample project in RC1. We've downloaded and upgraded to RC2. And at first, this probably looks like everything operates and has been updated. Because if we run our application, everything seems to be fine. It opens up, we can go ahead and log in using the account that we created in the previous section of this video. So I'm just going to go ahead and log in. But if we look a little closer, we'll see that nothing has really changed. So if we just go ahead and stop this, if we look inside of our project.json file, we'll see that all of the RC1 dependencies are still in place. So we haven't really upgraded anything. We're just simply using the old RC1 framework as well as the old RC1 dependencies. To truly get upgraded to RC2, we're going to have to do some pretty drastic things. So the first thing I'm going to do is go ahead and create a copy of the project.json file. And that's just so that we have some sort of reference later on if we need it. And we're going to do a pretty drastic action here. And I admit that this may not be the most efficient or the best way to do things, but for this video, for the purposes of this video, I simply can't know everything that you're going to have in your project. So I kind of want to show you a way to discover how to get your project working. And for me, that means I'm going to delete every single one of the dependencies that I have in my project.json file. And then I'm just going to go ahead and save this. Now I have that copy of the original project in case I ever need any sort of reference to one of the projects that I might have forgotten. I'm also going to go ahead and go up to the global JSON file, and I'm just going to go ahead and delete the SDK that gives us the version. We're just deleting that entirely, and of course I'll need to get rid of the comma after project so that it compiles correctly. Now, for those of you who are bothered by having some sort of warning message, you'll see dependencies not installed. If you see this, it's pretty simple to resolve. Just simply right-click on the dependencies and hit Restore Packages. Just to show you, that is actually the NPM that needed to be restored. Okay, so let's go back to our project.json file. And we can already start to see some of these green squiggly lines indicating that there need to be some changes. So let's take a look at some of these things. First, if I hover the mouse over this, it says compilation options is deprecated. Use build options instead. Well, okay, so I just need to change this to build options. Okay, so that's a pretty simple change. Now, if you still see the green squiggly line, don't worry about that. It's just simply because it hasn't resolved that this has actually been fixed. And after I save it, it looks like it now fixes it. If we scroll down here to the command section, we can actually go ahead and delete this. This is actually for DNX, which we no longer will be using with the RC2 version of ASP.NET Core. So we've removed commands. We can also remove the exclude and the publish exclude. So I'm going to delete those out of my project.json. And let's go ahead and save our project.json file one more time. And now we can see that all of the green squiggly lines have disappeared. So since Visual Studio looks to be happy with all of the changes that we made in the project.json file, let's see what happens if we actually try to build the project. If we look at our errors list, we can see that there are a lot of problems that are currently happening, and this isn't just simply because of the dependencies. And in fact, let's go ahead and address the first error that we find here. Cannot find runtime target for framework DNX Core version 5 compatible with one of the target frameworks, or target runtimes, excuse me, Win10, x64, or some of these other ones. So we need to change the frameworks from this DNX 451 and DNX Core 5, and we need to replace it with this new instance of Net Core App 1.0. And we also need to include this imports, which is an array of DNX Core 50 and portable-net 45 plus Win8. Essentially, we're defining a new set for the framework which imports the DNX Core 50 library and the portable net 45 plus Win8 libraries so that this can actually be a portable application. So now that we've made those changes, let's try saving it, and let's go ahead and build it again. And we see that we get 3 errors. The project does not list one of these different type of runtimes. It says the project has not been restored or restore failed, so we need to run this .NET restore. And finally, a very similar error message to what we saw before, cannot find runtime target for Net Core App version 1.0. So now we've added this Net Core App 1.0, it's still saying it's not compatible with some of our target runtimes. That's because we haven't actually set any target runtimes. And to solve all 3 of those, I really just simply need to add our runtime section. So I'm going to go down here below frameworks and I'm going to type in runtimes. And under the runtime section inside these curly braces, we can just specify one of those listed runtime editions. And you can see all of these are for Windows. So we'll do Win, and this is the version of operating system that I'm currently running under. So we'll do Win10-x64. And after we do that, it's going to need some, it's going to need a colon and then some extra curly braces, open and closed, and that should do it. So now we're specifying Windows 10 x64 as one of the runtimes that we can operate under. Let's go ahead and save this. And now if we once again try to build our application, we're going to see some more errors here, but they're going to look quite a bit different than what we've been encountering. So we can see that we're starting to miss some namespaces, and that's because some of our dependencies have not been introduced yet into the application. Now the first thing that we need to bring in here into our dependencies, and this took a little bit of research in order to find, but under the dependencies section, we actually need to pull in this Net Core App set of dependencies. So I'm just going to paste what I found here previously, and this pulls in the Microsoft.NET Core App NuGet. So you can see it's just going to go ahead and go out and grab this this API, and we're specifying the type is platform, and the version is going to be any version that is above 1.0.0 star. So let's go ahead and save that, and we'll see that it's going to go out and automatically go out and grab all of the dependencies for that package. Okay, so now that we have our Microsoft.NET Core App dependency, let's go ahead and once again rebuild the solution. And I think you're probably starting to see a pattern in the way that I'm going about diagnosing what the different problems are and seeing whether or not my application can build and can run. So we see in our output window that we had a few missing namespaces and assemblies here. So we should probably go ahead and take a look at some of our code and get it fixed. And I'm going to start off here by taking a look at our startup class. Inside our startup class, we can see that we have a bunch of usings that are pointing to some of those old dependencies that are no longer in our application. So the first thing I'm going to go ahead and do is right click and select organize usings and remove and sort usings. You will see me do this frequently throughout all of the code. It's a good idea to remove and sort your usings so that we get rid of all of those old dependencies. So let's take a look at iHosting environment. If I hover the mouse over this, you can see that we get some potential fixes, and these suggest that we can generate some interfaces, which of course is not what we want to do, but we can see we can add some different packages. And we are now getting a suggestion here for ASP.NET Core. So anytime that we get one of these suggestions where we can add a package, I want to strongly urge to you that you get the ASP.NET Core. This is the new namespace for all of the core logic or all the core framework. You do not want to get any of the namespaces that are ASP.NET dot. Okay, you want to make sure core is in the name, and also you want to check to make sure that you're getting an RC2 version of the package. So you never want to get the RC1 anymore. You always want to get the RC2. So we can go ahead and add the package Microsoft.ASP.NET Core.hosting.abstractions 1.1 RC2 final. So I'm going to go ahead and select that, and we should get some automatic restoration of our packages. After the restoration is complete, we can see iHosting environment is no longer considered incompatible. And now also, if we look at our project.json file, we can see that Microsoft ASP.NET Core hosting abstractions has been added to our dependencies. So this is going to be the strategy moving forward, that rather than trying to go to the project.json file and figuring out what all of your dependencies are supposed to be, I just like to go through my code and see where the errors are and add the necessary packages to make that section of the application work. So now let's go ahead and take a look at the configuration builder, and we're going to do the same thing. Just hit this and we can see, once again, add package Microsoft.extensions configuration 1.1 RC2 final. Let's go ahead and select that, and we'll see once again restoring the packages. So after that package is downloaded and configuration builder is resolved, we have another one here for add JSON file. Once again, add package. I can see that this one is RC2, so we don't see anything about core in this one, but we do see RC2 final, so that's the one that we want. I'm just going to continue down through our startup class, basically doing the same steps, and if there's anything interesting that I think that needs to be brought to your attention, I'll bring it up at that point. So as I was going through the startup class, when it came to the add entity framework, we went ahead and we can add the package for the core RC2. But when we do that, we'll see that after it's done restoring the packages, the add SQL Server method will no longer work, and neither will this use SQL Server down here. And if we just hover the mouse over this, we'll see that we get package entity framework Microsoft SQL Server RC1 final. So this is not the package that we want to get. So anytime that you see this, just understand that this is dangerous. This means that there's been some sort of very significant change to the original package that this method is an extension of. And because of that, we cannot use this particular package in order to get this. Otherwise, we will basically be reverting back to RC1, and we'll run into trying to add some of the old dependencies back in. And we don't want to do that. We want to move forward with the RC2 stuff. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is just comment this out for right now. And the new way that you add a Dbcontext and entity framework is you use services, and this of course needs to happen after you have added the new entity framework package to your project.json, so the entity framework core RC2 final. Once that's done, then what we can do is do add Dbcontext. So we just go straight to the add Dbcontext. We're not doing add entity framework. We're just adding a context, and that context is going to be application Dbcontext, which is the same Dbcontext that we used down here. And now we can basically do the same thing with our options too. We need to pass in a lambda expression for our options, and I'm just going to go ahead and copy what we have here. And take out the, there we go, it was being commented out, we don't need that. Now we see though that use SQL Server method does not work, but if we now take a look at this, we can see that we can actually add the RC2 package for this Microsoft Entity Framework Core SQL Server, so we'll go ahead and do that. So there has been a pretty significant change to the way that Entity Framework is implemented as the core version instead of Entity Framework 7. Now we are getting a new error, and if I hover the mouse over here, we can see that we have a problem with the type conversion. Now this is because there's no implicit reference. You can see there's no implicit reference conversion from application Dbcontext to Dbcontext. And if you look carefully, look at the namespaces here. It's saying that there's no conversion from application Dbcontext to the new entity framework core Dbcontext. And that's because the original application Dbcontext, if we go to it here, I'm just going to go to the definition, we see that it is still trying to implement this old identity Dbcontext that came from the other version of entity framework. So it was using this ASP.net.identity.entity framework. So once again, now that I'm here and I can see all these grayed out areas and we see that we have some missing references for our usings, I'm just going to go ahead and organize by remove and sort. And now I can go ahead and add the package for Microsoft ASP.NET Core Identity Entity Framework Core 1.00 RC2 Final. So this is kind of going back into some of the classes that others are referencing in order to add the appropriate packages. And once again, we see that we have some more squiggly lines we need to take care of. And if we look carefully here, we can see a very similar error. There's no implicit reference conversion from application user to Microsoft ASP.NET Core Identity Framework Core Identity User. And that's because the application user class is also basically the same problem that we had with application Dbcontext. So if I go to its definition, we'll see that once again, it's using Microsoft.ASP.NET Identity Entity Framework. Now you could certainly find a more efficient way, maybe do some, replace all in order to fix all of this. But I just kind of wanted to show you the hierarchical problems that are occurring in the background here. And now we can go ahead and use the ASP.NET Core Identity Entity Framework instead of this version of the entity framework that was there before. So that's been solved. Let's go ahead and save everything, close out of the application user, and now we should see that I believe we have, so our class definition looks okay here, but we're getting a problem with our onModel creating, and that's because the model builder class is not referenced properly. So let's add that. And now that we've added the using, we should be good to go. Everything looks fine. So let's go ahead and close that. And now if we go all the way back to our startup class, it looks like Visual Studio is happy now with our version after we've gone through all of the packages, added all the usings, and kind of drilled down to all of the different, to the Dbcontext and to the application user. We've finally resolved all of those missing usings and all of those missing packages and added them to our project.json. So I hope you guys kind of see the reasoning here in what I'm doing. I'm not just going through and just adding all the dependencies that were there before and trying to rename everything. That may be a quicker route to go, but by doing it this way, I'm able to diagnose down to the absolute level of where the problem is and add the correct dependency to the project.json without having to try to go through remembering or doing some sort of lookup of the conversion. It just simply adds it through the IntelliSense. So we can continue on down here and we'll see identity role. This is just going to need us to use the entity framework core, which is the package that we just brought in using the previous set of steps. We can add MVC, and we're going to just continue on doing the same thing that we were doing before. And once again, I'm going to stop recording the video here, and then once I come across something interesting to show you, I'll bring you back in. So continuing on down with the startup class, if you have this use IIS platform handler, you can actually just delete this. This is no longer important. We don't actually use it or add it to any of the configuration as far as in the startup class. I will be showing you how to set it up for IIS though using a different class, which we're going to get to in a little bit. So here I am at the bottom of my startup class, and we have the public static void main. And if you try to resolve this, you'll see that we can only add the package for RC1. And that's because this version of the main method is actually no longer valid. You can comment this out. We're going to be adding a main method, which is our entry point to the application, in another location. So to do that, I'm going to go ahead and save my startup class, and I'm going to go ahead and create a new class within my Core RC1 to RC2 project. So let's go to add class, and we're just going to call this class program.cs. So this is going to look somewhat typical to a console application. It's very, very similar in setup. We have a program class, and now we need to add a public static void main that accepts a string array called args. And this is where we're actually setting up our entry point to our new ASP.NET Core RC2 application. So there's a new class that's actually going to be our web builder. So this is going to be, I'm just going to call this var host equals new web host builder. And I do need to bring in another package here. So I'm going to go ahead and add a package. You can see this is the Microsoft.ASP.NET Core Hosting RC2 final. So let's go ahead and add that. Now on this new host object, this is where I'm going to indicate that I want to use IIS integration. This is a method that is actually on, it's an extension method for the web host builder class. So once again, I need to bring in another package, and you can see that package is the Microsoft.ASP.NET Core Server IIS Integration RC2. So we're just going to go ahead and do that. I'm also going to use Kestrel, which is the new cross-platform hosting service. So we're going to do that and bring that in as well. Now there's also another method on here which will allow me to pass in the startup class that we have all of the different services and configurations. And to do that, I'm just going to use startup, and you can see we can pass in a class type. So this is going to be our startup class. And so that is going to be passing in that startup class as the configuration of our web builder. And then finally, we're going to go ahead and use the build method, and that will actually build our web host builder. And then finally, after all of that has been completed, and actually I need a semicolon there, we're going to go ahead and do host.run. So there's our program class, and that should actually run our application. I'm going to go ahead and remove all of these unnecessary usings and save our program class. And now that we have our new program class, let's go ahead and try to build our application again. So after we've done this, we can see we have a bunch more dependencies to resolve. Let's go ahead and do that now. Looks like we've got a bunch of missing usings here, so let's remove and sort. And these are clearly all of our controller classes need to be fixed up. So let's go ahead and do basically the same process that we've been doing this whole time of adding using statements and adding packages that are necessary. So let's go ahead and use that and go to the controller. And once again, I'm going to pause the recording here, but the process is very similar to what we've been doing before. If you can bring in a using that has a core or RC2, that's what you want to do. Same with a package. You want to bring in a package that is core or RC2. So let's go ahead and bring in that using. And I'm just going to pause the recording here, and I'll come back to you when there's something interesting to show you. So I did come across an example that I want to show you of where in application Dbcontext model snapshot, which is a class that was generated back when the application was still an RC1 app. Remember how we tried to register through the website and we needed to apply some data migrations? Well, part of that was building this model snapshot. Part of the automatic process to implement the migration had this model snapshot class built. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and remove and sort our usings like we usually do. I'm going to go ahead and go to the Dbcontext here, and we'll go ahead and add the using statement that it wants. And now we'll see application Dbcontext model snapshot is not happy. There's a red squiggly line underneath the class. And that's because it says that you need to implement the abstract class, which is model snapshot, right? So we need to implement this abstract class. And it says that the signature of the method that we need to implement here for this abstract class is protected override void build model. And everything looks correct, right? Everything looks like this protected override void build model, protected override void build model, everything is right there. However, notice that the model builder class, now that we got rid of all those usings, it is looking for its using. And once we fix the signature here of this protected override void by adding the using here, then it's going to also make the class happy as well. So I've successfully gone through and fixed all of the usings and added all of the packages for all of the errors that were found in our initial error list. So whenever we get through with this and we fixed all those errors, it's always a good idea to go ahead and once again go back and rebuild your solution. Here you can see a new error list of a bunch more errors that we need to resolve, and that's kind of the continuous process that we have to go through. In this case though, if we take a look at this particular error, we'll see that these are kind of phantom errors, and I'm not really sure how they keep coming up whenever I run through this process. It says that that particular, like the namespace could not be found using an assembly or reference, and it seems like all you have to do is just basically reopen the class for each one of these errors, and it goes away. See, there's no actual error here anywhere in Home Controller. They seem to be ghost errors. So I'm just going to once again go through all of these, and if I'm just going to basically open the error, go to the class, and then close the class, and that's all I'm having to do to fix this particular set of errors. Okay, so once that error list is completed, let's go ahead and try once again, build our solution, and hopefully we shouldn't see any errors this time. Looks like I was wrong. There's some more here. Okay, let's see. Does not contain a definition for external principal extension. Okay, so now we're starting to get into some actual problems that we need to start tackling with some ingenuity and thought and some research. So here we're saying var email equals info external principal. Well, this external principal is not actually on the info object anymore. So I'm going to comment this out. We're going to recreate the var email object. We're going to use the same info, but on the info, we need to look carefully at what we do have available and try to see if we can diagnose what it was we were trying to do with the original command or the original code, and see if we can replicate it with the new classes that are available to us in RC2. So notice that the original code here was trying to create an email object using the info external principal find first value. Well, if we look at the info object, we actually do see a principal object. It's not an external principal, it's just a regular principal. So I think that we can probably safely say that the principal object is in fact the external principal object. It's just been renamed. Find first value, there we go. And let's see if we can use that claims type, or claim types. There we go, claim types, there we go. Email. The code looks like it's going to work just fine. So let's go ahead and go back to our error list and see what the next one is. Claims principal does not contain a definition of get user ID. Now this particular problem is one I'm rather frustrated with that they got rid of in the RC2 version. So looking at the list of breaking changes, you'll see that the identity claims principal extensions get username, get user ID, and is signed in has been moved. And we can see that these things have been moved to the user manager and the sign in manager classes. So we need to look for, under the where we previously just used the user get user ID, we actually need to look for a user manager object, and we need to get the get user ID method and pass along a user principal. So looking back inside of our manage controller class where our get user ID method is currently trying to run, we can probably see if we can find where that user manager object is. And if we scroll all the way up here to the top, we'll see that we have an underscore user manager object that is a private object to the class. and it is being injected. It has dependency injection that is putting in that user manager. And dependency injection, as you probably already know, is very big in both RC1 and RC2 of ASP.NET Core. So we can use this do user manager object instead. So we'll do underscore user manager, and it was get user ID, and we need to pass in a principal. So we need to pass in a principal as a parameter to this get user ID. And luckily for us, user is in fact a principal. So you can look and hover the mouse over this user object and see that it is a claims principal. So system security claims principal. So we can pass in the user object right into this get user ID method of the user manager object. And that will do exactly the same thing as the previous user.getUserID method. Frankly, I'm not particularly thrilled with this. I'm not even sure why they thought it was a big, something that they needed to do, but it is what it is. So similarly to when we had the get user ID, it appears that this is signed in method is no longer valid either. So we have to actually look for another location where we can try to get it. Well, what is this is signed in method trying to do? Well, it's just trying to figure out whether or not this particular user has logged in. And luckily for us, there is another location we can find a Boolean for finding out whether or not somebody has logged in. And that would be under the user.identity is authenticated. And that will do the same basic thing, except it is a property that returns a Boolean instead of a method. So we've got rid of all of our errors. Let's go ahead and once again do our build solution and see if we get any more errors. All right, we have our first successful build. We have no errors in our error list. We have successfully built the project. Let's see if it actually runs. So the true test is going to be whether or not we can log in with the same username and password that we created the account with in the first place. Let's go ahead and run our application here. So of course, inevitably, if you get a proper build, everything looks like it's fine, it compiles correctly, and you try to go run it, what's going to happen? You run into a runtime error. So guess what? We've got a runtime error here. And in this case, it says, if you look at the additional information, unable to locate a project.json. Now, I've seen it run into problems finding the appsettings.json file. I've seen it run into problems finding the project.json file or any type of JSON file at all. And I tried a whole multitude of different things, but eventually I found that there were two places that I need to tell it explicitly what directories to look for. First, on the builder object for our configuration builder in our startup class, we need to say set base path, and we can use the environment object here, so env, and we're going to say content root path. Now this iHosting environment is actually being passed into the startup class from our program class. Remember, we had the main method where it was building the web host builder, and we were passing into the startup class using this use startup method. Well, so we actually have to set the path that we want here that's eventually going to get passed into the startup class. So that's why we have to change it in two places. We're going to go ahead and do use content root, and we're just going to use directory dot get current directory, and that is a method. Let's go ahead and save that. And now we've got the directory, the current directory, being passed along into the startup class during this whole web host builder process here. And then in the startup class, it's going to get that directory as part of the environment, the iHosting environment object. And then we can use that environment object to set the base path on the configuration builder object to that content root path that we basically set back here in our program class. So I hope that makes sense to everybody. Now let's go ahead and run this again and see if we have any more compile or any more runtime errors. So now we see an error occurred when it tried to compile a resource that was required. We can see that the error is being generated off of this view imports file. And if we look carefully here, we can see add tag helper. It's looking at this Microsoft.asp.net, ASP.NET.MVC tag helper. So it's looking in the wrong namespace for this tag helper. Let's see if we can go ahead and fix that. So I'm going to go over to my views, and I'm going to go to the view imports file, and sure enough, here we see add tag helper. It's looking in the wrong location. And in fact, we even have a using statement here that looks to be incorrect as well. So let's go ahead and fix that. We'll do ASP.NET Core, ASP.NET Core identity. There we go, identity. And now we need to go ahead and add, and it's really simple to fix this. We just add core here to the end of ASP.NET, and that's actually going to point to the correct tag helper. Let's save it, run it again, and see if we have any more runtime errors. Okay, so we're making some more progress. We've got a new error here. The Razor view page views home index failed to compile. Ensure that your application's project.json sets the preserve compilation context compilation property. So it looks like we're missing a setting in our project.json file. So I'm just going to go ahead and copy this preserve compilation context, and we need to add this to our project.json file. So let's go into our project.json, and it actually needs to go at the same place where we have the build options. So I'm going to put a comma here. We'll do preserve compilation context, true, and let's save it and run it again. So now the runtime error we're getting is actually in our login partial view, and you can see it wants to try to use this is signed in method that we already know doesn't exist anymore. And we can also see that it's trying to do this thing with the hello get username method as well, which has also been deprecated. So we need to go ahead and fix both of these things in our login partial view. So let's go to login partial view here. I'm going to close or shut down our web server, and we're going to go to shared login partial. And now we need to change user is signed in to look at the identity is authenticated. There we go. And that again does the same thing. Now for user get username, we can take this out and we could say user identity name. So there is a corresponding property, and it's just a matter of trying to find out where that corresponding property is. And they did this a lot through the new release candidate too. They didn't really necessarily drop things. They just kind of moved them around to different locations. And you have to use their announcements and look through their breaking changes announcements to see where all of these different little changes have happened. So let's go ahead and save this, and once again, let's run it and see if we get somewhere. Well, would you look at that? We have an application running in front of us. It looks like we've finally got through all of the changes that we needed in order to get RC1 to RC2, but we have to make sure. So we're going to go to login, and ba-dum-bump, we have another runtime problem. Okay, so this one is saying that the configuration value verbose for category default is not supported. And if we look more carefully, we can see this has to do with the logging. Okay, we're looking for the logging extensions. So let's go ahead and stop this again. And if we look at our application JSON, let me just find it here. Application settings JSON, there we go. We can see log level default is set to verbose. And this setting is no longer available. You cannot set the default log level to verbose. But you can use either information or more useful would be debug. So let's go ahead and save that. And let's see if that fixes that particular error. Okay, so here we are again at the main screen. Let's try to log in and see if we get past this. And no, surely not. We have a bunch of views that still have the wrong usings. Okay, so we have a usings here for our views accounts login. We have an incorrect using here, but we also have this little doohickey here. Validation summary does not contain a definition for validation summary. Well, let's take a look at this login CSHTML and see if we can find, well, let's fix the usings and see if we can find out what's going on with that validation summary. So we'll go to account, login. Let's go ahead and fix our usings here, which we just need to change these to core. So we're adding core after ASP.NET, and that resolves those. But then we have right here in this validation summary, what's happened is that the validation summary object that gets passed in as part of the model, the login view model, well, there is no more validation summary class or property on that. So you can actually just go ahead and delete that and just use all. And we'll save that. And let's try running it again. Okay, so we get our home screen. We go to log in, and oh my goodness, we can log in. Let's try it. Log in. More exception errors. Well, I'm not surprised. Are you? So this particular error was a bit tricky to find, but it turns out that they've changed the way that you have to create your Dbcontext, or the way that your constructors have to work for your Dbcontexts. So I'm going to go back into our application, and we need to go to our application Dbcontext, which is under models, application Dbcontext, and you can see that there is no there's no constructor here. So we need to add a new constructor, and this constructor takes a class of Dbcontext options with and it's going to pass in a tContext, which is going to be our application Dbcontext. And we're just going to pass this in as options, and we need to pass this along to the base class, because the identity Dbcontext can take a Dbcontext options as a parameter, so for its constructor. So we need to pass along options. And now let's see if that resolves that problem. Okay, so let's try logging in again, and hopefully now we actually get through and it recognizes the account from our database. It's not popping up an immediate error. Can we claim success? Yes, we can. Oh my goodness, we are finally in our application. We can click on About, we can click on Contact and Home. We can look at our, we can manage our account. So that's going to do it for me. That's all of the changes that I needed to make in my application to get it compliant with the RC2 version of ASP.NET Core. But I'm sure you guys are going to have a lot more issues that you're going to run into, some changes in especially the namespace. Just remember, ASP.NET has been moved to ASP.NET Core. So your namespace Microsoft.ASP.NET is now Microsoft.ASP.NET Core. And as long as you remember that, you're going to make things a lot easier for yourself when you're trying to find where those classes should be. And again, I do think that it's worthwhile to go through and find out all of your dependencies and see where everything is actually located. What are the actual projects or packages that you need to get in order to make your RC2 application run? One final note before I let you go, just remember the DNX and DNU and the DNVM are all gone. You don't use them anymore. You now use the .NET compiler. That is where you actually go to run your applications. You no longer use DNX to do any of your commands or to run your application. So good luck to you. I hope that you found this video helpful. I'm sure all of the issues that I encountered at one point or another, you're going to run into during your upgrade process. Just keep plugging away at it. There are lots and lots of these errors and changes, breaking changes, that you're going to find. And again, that list of breaking changes can be found here at the ASP.NET GitHub repository. And again, I will post this link to for you in the description so you can see this list of 55 breaking changes. Well, not all of them are breaking, but 55 cases or changes between RC1 and RC2 that are really important for you to know because they will cause problems in your application. So there you go. If you guys enjoyed this video, please don't forget to like, favorite, and subscribe to my channel. I like to come out with more and more of these ASP.NET Core videos for you, and hopefully I will see you in the next one.